Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Po Boy Rice, and I am an alcoholic. Hello. Hi, everybody. Good to be here. Good to be sober. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Fred and the committee for allowing me to be a part of your 5th Gratitude Retreat. I like that name, Gratitude, because I am a grateful recovering. Thank you. Will that take your picture? There may be 2 or 3 of you out there who don't know me, and I think it's only fair that I tell you that I'm a little bit old-fashioned and I'm kind of countrified. And the only reason I share that with you is because you never would have known it if I hadn't have told you. Do I look like I'm from the South? I'm also grateful to see this 8,000 or 10,000 people out here this evening, because I understand that Glenn is taping this, and I want to get one of those tapes and carry it back to my home group, because all they know is what I tell them. And every time I go to talk somewhere, I never know when I'm going to run into somebody that I might have known before I got to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I would like to share something else with you. And this is about a friend of mine who lived down in Georgia. The old fellow died somewhere between 4 and 5 years ago. And this old boy came from the state of North Carolina. And he stole a man's milk cow, and they gave him 12 months in the chain gang. And when he finished his sentence, he was so ashamed of himself, he moved down in Georgia, and he got him a job, and he went to work, and he started attending a little old Baptist church down the road. And he established such a good record in the community and in the church until after a while they elected him to serve on the deacon board. And he continued on with this good record until after a while their preacher resigned, and they asked this old buddy of mine if he'd be the preacher, and he accepted. And on the very first Sunday morning that he walked up in the pulpit to deliver his sermon, he looked down the aisle and he saw a long-legged joker come walking in there he used to be in the chain gang with. Now you know that kind of messed things up. And he started his sermon off something like this: "Now, brothers and sisters, I came here this morning fully prepared to preach to you from the book of John. But after observing this great congregation, I have changed my text to the 2nd chapter of Jude, where it says, if you knows anything, or if you sees anything that ain't already leaked out, just keep your mouth shut till this meeting's over with, and we'll talk about it out in the yard." That's kind of the way it is with Po Boy. And Joe, I did quite a bit of research before I found out there ain't no 2nd chapter of Jude. I don't know where that dude come up with that at. But this evening, as usually, I am privileged to have this silver-haired little old lady sitting over here to my right, who is my wife and who I call Old Flo. Now, old Flo, she ain't all that old. That's just a pet name. She calls me old po' boy. And every time I start to talk, she says, now, don't you tell them folks how old I am. I don't know what makes women like that. That's just the way they are. And so, of course, I respect her wishes, and I just say old Flo got here about the same time kerosene did. Now, you know, this was back down in the days when castor oil was a wonder drug, sort of like penicillin when it came out. Well, thank God we can laugh. I love to laugh. I can laugh today. I love to see other people laugh. But I can remember when I cried too. How about you? I remember when I came to the fellowship of this program. Thank God I came to a happy group. You know, if I'd have walked in there and one of those dudes with a face just about this long, they looked like he could eat oats out of a half-inch gas line pipe, and they'd have started reading, if you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, I'd have thought, baby, I don't want what you got. I had some of that before I got here. Thank God I'm alive. This is not a dead program. This is not a dead end. This is not a dull, boring, and gloomy program. This is a living program, and it's also a feeling program. Thank God, one day, this God that I talk about picked old po' boy up off of the scrap pile, and he gave me a new lease on life, and he established my going. That big book that it didn't say I carried the message, it said I tried to carry the message. And this is what I'm trying to do this evening, to share a little bit of my experience, strength, and hope with you. And that 5th chapter said our story just closed in a gentle way, what we used to be like, what happened and what we are like today. And it's not easy for me to talk about some of those things that happened. I sure enough love to talk about what it's like today. I was born a little over 71 years ago down here in Rockdale County, Georgia. And my old daddy was a sharecropper and a moonshiner. And I think we were about the poorest folks there were that lived in Rockdale County. We just lived in an old house over in the field. 5 years ago, I retired. And I moved back to Rockdale County, Flo and I. And we moved into a little old government housing project. My friends, let me tell you something. There's a difference between a house and a home. In this little old government housing project where Flo and I live today, we have a home. We have each other. We have love. We have God in our lives. And the fellowship of a program of Alcoholics Anonymous. All my life, I always kept getting my needs and my wants mixed up. Today, by the grace of God, my needs are being met. I'm learning a little bit about how to live, and I never knew this before. I remember this old house we lived in over in the field. There was 2 jugs that always sat in the old kitchen where we eat at. One of them was a jug of shine liquor, and the other one was a jug of sorghum syrup. So other than becoming an alcoholic, I turned out to be quite a syrup sopper. I don't know how old I was when my dad moved us to Atlanta. And we moved into a part of the city, maybe some of you know about it, they call it Cabbage Town. And then, as it is today, it was a real slummy era. And every little old boy that lived on the block we lived on, he was a graduate from some reform school, or he was a candidate for some reform school. If he hadn't been there, he was on his way. And of course, we all know what it's like to be young at some time or another. And we like to be accepted by the people that we so closely associated with. You are who you associate with. And of course, I wanted to be accepted. And I began to do some of the things these other boys did. I remember very well that when some of these other kids' dad would buy them a bicycle, my dad was so poor he couldn't buy me one, and I'd steal one. And a little bit later on, when some of these kids' dad would buy them an old hot rod, my dad was so poor he couldn't buy me one, and I'd steal one. Now, I always had just as much as the rest of the kids, but mine was all hot. And when I was 16 years old, they had me up in that Fulton County courthouse because I found out that the law frowned on some of those things I was doing. And I never will forget what that judge told my mother. He said, "I'm going to send your boy to the chain gang and let him see what it's like out there, and then I'm going to turn him right back out, and I'm sure that your boy will be a better boy." Now, of course, we would believe anything that anybody told us, especially the judge. Now, this was back in March of 1929. And so I went to the chain gang, and I expected to get out that night or no later than the next morning, because that's what the judge said. But it didn't work that way. They kept me 4 years. And so mixing and mingling with the people that I was so closely associated with, I had become a real smart aleck. Now, we all know what a smart aleck is, only I got another name for that too. I hated everything that stood for law, honesty, decency, and respectability. So 4 years later, I came back out on the streets of Atlanta, and I drank liquor day and night. I couldn't tell you how old I was when I taken my first drink of liquor. I was probably in diapers. All of my family drank it. Everybody we know drank it. We didn't see nothing wrong with it. And so I came back out and I continued to drink liquor. And just a few days after being released from this old chain gang camp, right out on the outskirts of Atlanta one night, in a drunken stupor, I wrecked a car and I killed my mother. And I never got over this for many, many years. My God, it's those nightmares. And I could hear Mama crying and begging and pleading, trying to get me to slow that car down, and I wouldn't do it. I was a smart aleck, and it was my fault. And I had to live with that guilt for many, many years. And then I began to run with some of the worst people in this country. And it wasn't too long until I was captured, tried, and convicted, and sentenced to serve the rest of my life in prison. I had no hopes of ever being free again except to run out. And I run all my life in all over Georgia, and I escaped from every institution I was confined in except the last one. Or I attempted to escape. Some of those men were not as fortunate as I was. Some of them were shot down and killed trying to escape. Some of them was killed out on the highways or the streets by all policemen. And some of them went to the electric chair. So it is by God's grace that poor boy stands here and share a little bit of my experience, strength, and hope with you this evening. Of course, I violated every prison rule that they had. This was back in the days when they used the old sweat boxers and the stocks. And of course, they whipped me with everything imaginable, and I continued to get worse. You don't win people like that. Somebody might ask the question, well, how do you win them? There's a little old four-letter word that says L-O-V-E, love. Thank God for that word love, because there's power. There's power in this kind of love I'm talking about. I've seen it move men that you couldn't move with a Thompson submachine gun. And of course, this is why this is such a great fellowship, because there's so much love and identity and fellowship here. Eventually, the federal government built a place down in Tattenall County that we call it Reesville, which is a state penitentiary. And I was one of the first convicts to enter that new prison in October 1937. And they locked me in a little cell for 8 months until they could open up a rock quarry for incorrigibles. And I was transferred over there for the next 3 years, but I managed to escape on 2 different occasions. And they sent me back to Reedsville under what they called a stop order, never to be transferred out again. A short time later, we got a new warden down there, and out of 2,500 convicts, he picked 10 of us with the worst escape records. He said, carry these men to maximum security. They'll never come back to population as long as I'm warden. We had a lot of friends, and we had a lot of connections. 30 days later, we escaped from maximum security at midnight. And we came downstairs, and we captured the whole inside of the penitentiary. We'd taken over the front office, the powerhouse, the switchboard. We had complete control. Now, that never happened before, and it's never happened since then. And I walked down through those cell blocks with a market basket full of keys, and I turned everybody out that said they wanted to run away. And I suppose I let about 100 out. So we threw that main switch, and we had a complete blackout. All the inside lights, outside lights, tower lights, all of them went out at one time. And there was 25 of us went out those big front doors and taking cars off of the yard and left. That other 75 I let out, they went down there and broke in the commissary and got all that juicy fruit chewing gum, brown mule chewing tobacco, and hunkies and stamped envelopes. They didn't want to run away, they just wanted to steal something that's full of larceny. And so the governor, he offered a $1,000 reward, dead or alive, for every one of us. Now, this was back during World War II when this happened. And they called out the army, and they set up roadblocks all over the South. And within another month's time, we were all back in jail somewhere, with the exception of one little 17-year-old boy who got drowned in the river that night. They started what they called an 8-ball squad. Our heads were shaven. We were placed out on a field digging stumps, segregated from the rest of the prisoners. And every state trooper in the state of Georgia had to come to Reedsville and stay 10 days, guard duty, 10 at a time, that they might know these men anywhere on sight. We were not allowed any visitors or any mail privilege or any store privilege, any reading material, not even any lights in our cells. So many of these men began to break their legs and to break their arms and to cut their heel tendons, known as a heel string. And some of them crippled themselves for life. And so the word leaked out back to Atlanta is how these men were crippling themselves. And the governor picked a group of men to come to Reedsville to make an investigation and to come back down to the Capitol and make some recommendation as to how to stop this. He picked the president of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, a lot of judges, probation officers, newspaper reporters, and photographers. And one other man I'll never forget as long as God lets me stay in this old world. His name was Mr. Wiley J. Moore. Mr. Moore was a millionaire banker in Atlanta. And the governor asked Mr. Moore to head up this squad and said, the state of Georgia will back you up 100% in any recommendation you men make. And so they came to Reedsville, and we were driven out of these old muddy river bottoms into this old dark cell house. And Mr. Moore said, open that door, I want to go in here and talk to these men. And they said, you can't go in there because it's too dangerous. This was the first time in my life I had ever heard anybody talk about God in a respectful manner. Mr. Moore said, I prayed before I came down here. He said, if this is the way God wants me to die, then I am not afraid. Never in my life had I heard anybody talk like that. And of course I didn't understand it. But I had all the respect in the world for that man because he could look me right straight in the eye and he was not afraid. They opened the door and he came in and we followed him to the rear of this old cell house and we sat down in a big circle. And Mr. Moore sat down in the center of this group with his tears just flowing down his face. And he told us about the God of his understanding. He said, it's not for sale, you don't buy it. And the most amazing thing of it all, he said, you don't have to be good to get it. He said, it is a gift. You just accept it. My God, I could not understand that kind of talk. But for many, many years after that, when I would be out digging a ditch or digging a stump, I would think about that message that man had brought me, and I wanted to be like that man, but I didn't know how to be like that man. I had a lot of respect for him. He said, I'm going to let your hair grow out so you'll look like a human being. Excuse me. He said, I'm going to take those old stripes and those old chains off of you. I'm going to let you pick any job in this institution that you want, that you might learn a trade that'll be worthwhile to you one day on the street. He said, I don't care how many life sentences you're serving. If anybody in this detail would just do 5 years with a perfect record, I guarantee you a parole. What an opportunity. There was only one man in that group that taken advantage of that opportunity. He did do 5 years. He was paroled. And as far as I know, he is the only one of the old-timers that's still living today. He's an old grandpa. He never got back in trouble. But you know what kind of job I asked for? I asked for a job down in the steward's department. That's where they got all that meal and sugar and syrup and yeast. I intended to stay drunk. A lot of people wonder, how in the world can you drink in the penitentiary? Well, I got news for you, honey. It's easier to get in there than it is out here on the streets. You don't have to walk as far after it. And of course, I had learned this trade from my daddy as a little old boy. All it is still beer. And so I stayed drunk. And for the next few years, there was an awful lot of things that happened. A lot of them were real tragedies, and I prefer not to talk about them. I like to look at the humorous side of life. There's a lot of comical things happen, too. And one that I always remember, and this was a little old buddy of mine. He had a nickname, too. They called him Hitler. Now, Hitler was weighed just about 75 pounds soaking wet. And, of course, out here in the streets, they call it beer, but in the penitentiary, we call it buck. And if there was anybody in Reedsville that loved buck as good as I did, it was old Hitler. And I pulled off a batch there one morning, and old Hitler got drunk and got out there in the hall and got arrested on a plain drunk charge. And they had him down at the control office, and the warden said, Hitler, where'd you get that buck at? And he'd taken his hat off and he bowed over real humbly and he said, Captain said, you can just whip this old head of mine till it rattles like a pot of okra if you want to. But I ain't going to say one word against my good friend Po' Boy Rice. Now, old Hitler, he swore he didn't snitch on me. He didn't know how they found it out. But, you know, then, as many other times, we'd have to go upstairs and eat bread and water for a few days. That was just a merry-go-round. That's where I was doing time. But I used this little extra privilege I had of mixing and mingling with the other convicts and plotting, scheming, planning. And it wasn't too long till I had me an old pistol smuggled in there. And I enticed 5 other men to help me, and we got up there one morning. We were so drunk we didn't know we was in the world hardly. And we captured 19 of those free people and had them all tied up in haywire, using them as hostage, and trying to go out the gates with them. But I can honestly say to you this evening, thank God I didn't get through those gates that time, because I wouldn't have been living today. And anything that I tell you that happened to me, don't you feel sorry for me, because I asked for every bit of it. And so they stripped me off naked, and they beat me till I was bloody as a hog, and they carried me to the death house. And there I remained for the next 2.5 years in the shadow of the Georgia electric chair. I was not condemned They were holding me for safekeeping. They done got tired of fooling with me. And this was the only place that they knew to keep me. And of course, I wasn't allowed any visitors, any male privilege, and I didn't have any money. And if I ever got a cigarette, one of those condemned prisoners had to give me a cigarette. This did not make a Christian out of me, but it certainly did change my mind about a lot of things. 2.5 years later, I came back to population with a thought like this: I surrender, I give up, I can't beat you. When I go again, I'm going out that front door a free man. I'll go out that back gate in a pine box. I give up. And in my way of thinking, for the next 7 years, I made what I called a good record. I stayed drunk most of the time, but I stopped trying to escape. And by this time, we had a pardon and a parole board down in Georgia. And every year they'd come down there and talk to me and make a recording of it, head back to the Capitol. Come back next year and we'd talk some more. But after 7 years, they said, "Poor boy," said, "we feel like you've been in long enough, but you've been too closely confined for too many years to be turned out with the public." I didn't know anything about World War II. I didn't have a trade. Excuse me. He said, "We're going to recommend that they send you back out to a road camp and let you mix and mingle with the people out there, and when you get used to being around folks again, we're going to turn you out." So sure enough, they transferred me up to Cobb County, and they told my relatives that we're going to send him up there on trial, and if he makes good for just 1 year, we're going to turn him out. Well, I felt like a misdemeanor then. I'd count the months and the weeks and the days off, and this year was up. And they sent me a letter and said, "Stay another year." That like broke my heart. I couldn't understand things like this. I was a real weak individual. And I had another thought, and it was something like this: when my folks come to see me on Sunday, I'm going to get what little money they got, and I'm going to leave because I could have. But all these years I'd been gone, my little old brother and sister growed up. They had families of their own, and they had all become church people. I never could understand why they never talked to me about God. I guess they thought I was absolutely a hopeless case. I look at it like this: all the way down through life, in different times, different incidents, there were some little seeds that were planted. Mr. Moore planted a seed down in that old cell house that day. My sister came out there that morning and she planted another one. She said, "I know you don't have a God," she said, "but I do." And she said, "There's an awful lot of people praying for you that you don't even know." She said, "Don't do anything till in the morning. Let me go back down to the Capitol." And I owed my sister an awful lot. She had run her legs off for many, many years trying to help me. But then, just like I did my mother, I took her for granted. You know, she's supposed to do all these things, so I thought. I can remember so many times when my mother was living, when she wouldn't have streetcar fare, and she'd walk in the rain or the snow or whatever, down to this old chain gang camp, bring me a sack of bull durham smoking tobacco and say, "Mama still loves you, and we hope you can come home sometime." This was Mama. I took her for granted. Mama's supposed to do this, so I thought. And I didn't miss her until it was too late. So all of my life I took people for granted, and I lived with an attitude that one day I'll get even. But I look at it this way: those little seeds that were planted at different times down through life, one day they started to sprout, and they started to grow, and they were about to come to the surface, until one day, thank God, they blossomed out in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank God. I promised my sister I'd behave myself till the next day. And when I came in that evening, they said, "Po boy, you stay in the morning. Somebody's going to carry you to Atlanta to the Capitol. The board wants to talk to you some more." I couldn't hardly sleep on that old bed that night for thinking about this God that my sister had so much faith in. And sure enough, they carried me to Atlanta, and there's a lot of people up there representing me. I didn't even know them. They're just friends of my family. And they said, "Well, we're going to reconsider, and we'll let you know what our final decision is in a couple of weeks." Of course, that didn't satisfy me. But I suppose it was about 2 weeks later I was paroled, and I'd been in 20 years, 1 month, and 2 weeks. And back in those days, when you made parole, somebody'd have to come pick you up and carry you home and bring you some clothes to wear. And I never will forget that my sister came to pick me up that morning, and she brought me a sports shirt and a pair of slacks. And that was the first time in my life I had ever owned a pair of breeches with a zipper on them. Now, honey, I'm telling you, that turned me on. I'd catch myself standing in front of the mirror going zip, 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 zip. And that's the kind of person I was when I came back to Atlanta after a little over 20 years. Every time the doors of the church were open, my people all went. It was sort of a take it or leave it proposition. Now, you can go with us, or you can stay here by yourself. And so out of curiosity, I went. I went for all the wrong reasons. I met a lot of wonderful people up there, people who wanted to help me. But a person who had lived the way I had all these years, I had built a wall up there, see? And you couldn't get close to me. I kept everybody at a distance. And I wouldn't let people help me. But there was one good thing that came out of me going to meeting. That's where I met old Flo at here, my wife. And a short time later, Flo and I were married. We rented some furnished rooms. And there was 2 men in that church. They got me a job digging ditches for a plumbing company. Man, I'm a good ditch digger. And I started digging ditches, and old Flo and I, we'd go to meeting on Sunday. And I didn't drink liquor. After a while, they gave me a dime raise and made me a plumber's helper. And I stayed with that until I got one of those little old cards that said that I was a journeyman plumber. And I said, "Man, I've hit the big time now. I can make some money." So I went out to Emory University. I got me a job as plumber. I could just about wear my house shoes to work every morning. And I worked out there for 2 years, and I didn't drink liquor. And one morning they called me in the office and said, "Poor boy, your past has caught up with you. We can't work a person like you with your record. We're going to have to let you go." So here's another big letdown, and I'm still a very weak individual. And I got mad, and I didn't know for sure who I was mad at, and I wanted to get even with somebody, but I didn't know where to start at. And that old false pride, it just wouldn't let me go home and tell Flo what had happened. She would have understood. And of course, we could have worked it out very easy. But I was full of resentment and anger. And every morning I'd let her put that bread and meat in a sack, and I'd cut out like I was going to work, and I didn't have a job, and I didn't want a job. I was full of anger. And I didn't know anything about legalized whiskey or beer. And that next morning I walked into one of those honky-tonks, and I said, "What's the strongest beer you got?" He said, "Man, it's all just alike." Well, this is the way I started getting even. And then the booze. And after a while, I'd find myself in such a shape that I had too much respect for Flo, and I wouldn't go home. And most of the time, I'd just walk the streets of Atlanta all night by myself and cry. Poor little old me. I know there ain't nobody here who felt that way. Poor, pitiful, and put upon. Nobody loves me. Nobody understands me. And I said, I'll run. I'll just go somewhere where don't nobody know me, and maybe I can start all over again. By this time, the police was hunting me, and I couldn't go home. But I wanted to see Flo one more time. And I called my brother and asked him if he'd go pick Flo up and bring her somewhere to meet me. We spent the night together in a motel that night, and the next morning, it was Sunday morning, and the sun was shining so beautiful and bright. And I walked with Flo up to the bus stop. And I stood there and I watched her get on that bus and drive off out of my life. And I sat there on that wall and I cried. And I heard some church bells ringing, and I looked over there and there was a whole bunch of happy people getting out, shaking hands and hugging each other's neck, going into a church. And I asked myself a question. Why can't I be like these people? Why do I have to be this kind of a person? It's all gone now. And so I run. The problem was I carried poor boy with me. And of course that liquor over there in the mother state just like it is in Georgia. And a few days later the police had picked me up in DT just crazy as a bat. They sent over there and got me, brought me back to Atlanta, put me under a $10,000 bond. My people put up the home, everything they had to get me out on the streets. Walk the streets at night and feel sorry for poor boy. I'm an alcoholic. And I run again. Went to another state, put in jail the first night I got there. Just as guilty as I could be. I don't know what time it was, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, walking up the main street there in Chattanooga. And I saw those fancy neon signs flashing, fancy wines and liquor, and I thought the place was open, but when I got up there, it's closed like everything else. So what does an insane alcoholic do? I just knocked the front end of that glass out and stood there and filled my pockets full of bottles. I cut my hand. I didn't even have sense enough to know I was cut. And walking up the street, my pocket full of blood. And the police run up and threw a shotgun on me and carried me back down there, and I lied like a dog. I said I didn't do it. They said, how in the world are you going to deny something like this? And I said, I don't know, but I am, and I did. And they put me in jail, and they kept me in jail for 5 weeks until the grand jury met. And they called me downstairs one evening about dark. It was in the wintertime, and I didn't have a dime. I didn't have a cigarette. And they opened the door and said, get. And I got. I thought they'd made a mistake, and I run 5 blocks just hard as I could. And finally I realized that those people had not made a mistake. And for many, many years I wondered why those people didn't indict me. I couldn't understand that. Joe, you remember last May you and I was in Maryville, Tennessee, and I got my answer. I talked to a city judge from Chattanooga, and I was telling this story to him, and he began to laugh. He said, po' boy, said, do you remember anything unusual that happened the next morning after they picked you up? And I said, yes, I do. I said, this city detective that was trying to question me, and I was about to have a fit, he asked me if I was an alcoholic, and I told him no. And he said, well, I'm going to do something for you, but don't you tell them other fellows about it. And he went back there and he got me a glass that high full of liquor and gave it to me. And this old judge started laughing. He said, po' boy, he said, that man knew more about you than you knew about yourself. He said, that man was an alcoholic. He said, that man was a member of this fellowship. And said, when your case went before the grand jury, that man went for you. And he talked to that grand jury, and he told those people that you was an alcoholic, and that you was an insane alcoholic. And if they would just turn that idiot loose, that he'd go back to Georgia, and we wouldn't have to fool with him up here. He said, that's why they turned you out. And of course, that's what I did. And I'd make my way on back to Flo just to get what little money she had and to walk the streets and feel sorry for po' boy and drink liquor. An old buddy of mine had got out of the penitentiary. Him and I had been real close for nearly 50 years. him and I was both drunk one evening and was going up that 4-lane highway right near Marietta. It's something else now, they call it a 4-lane then. And right across the road from a filling station we had a flat tire. So we went over and bought a new tire from that man. He said, get that old Ford over in the yard and I'll put it on for you. So we're trying to get this old Ford over in that yard, and there's a Thunderbird deal, and his family from up in Ohio was on the way to Florida on vacation. And they run over us and tore up our car. And like two idiots, we jumped out and took theirs away from them. How insane can you get? Well, that just look, you know, if you're going down the road and somebody come along and tear up your car, they ought to have to give you theirs. That's the way I thought. But I come to find out the law kind of frowns on that kind of stuff, too. And so they run us into a roadblock down there, and it wasn't so much as what we had done, but because of our past. And they gave me and this old boy 20 more years apiece, and they sent us both back to Reedsville. Flo didn't have nowhere to go. She finally went out to Piedmont Hospital, and she got a job working at night from 11 till 7 in the morning. Sleep in the daytime, write me a letter once a week, beg somebody every 3 or 4 months to bring her to see me. If I'd had the nerve, I'd have cut my throat. I didn't see no way to live 20 more years in there. And I still didn't know how to pray. Thank God Flo did. And I'm sure that her and a lot of other people kept on praying. And I like to look at it this way, because 14 months later, they transferred me up to Stone Mountain, Georgia. They were building a new prison camp up there, and they sent me up there to put the plumbing in that new prison camp. And when we finished that new prison, the warden had us to install a little chapel out in one end of the mess hall. And he called me out on the front. He said, "Po boy, I have a different assignment for you every Sunday afternoon, because we're going to have a different church group from all over this area coming out here holding services." He said, "I want you to stand by that door, and I want you to welcome the visitors when they come in." He said, "I'm going to get a bunch of songbooks, and I want you to lead the singing." He said, "I want you to go back there in those bullpens and form a choir out of those convicts." How about that for ignorant, uneducated Georgia stump jumper? But I wanted to do it. I wanted to do what the man asked me to do. I look at it this way: those little seeds that had been planted, they were just about to come to the surface. And I knew I wasn't in no shape to do what he asked me to do, and I don't believe in straddling that fence. I didn't know how to pray, but I found me an altar, and it was an old black burnt hickory stump out in the woods. I'll never forget. I dropped down on my knees by that old stump, and I said, "God, if there is a God and wherever you at, I give what's left, old poor boy, to you. I ain't gonna run no more. I'm tired. I'm tired of that old way. I could stand here all night and I couldn't tell you what happened, other than this. Since that day and since that hour, I have not wanted to rob, steal, or kill anybody since then. But I'll tell you something else. He left me an alcoholic. And I hope to God I don't ever see that day that I think I'm cured. And I will be an alcoholic as long as there's breath in my body." I went back and then I did what the warden asked me to do. I welcomed those visitors, and I led the singing. And I formed a choir out of those convicts. And the good Lord sent a honky-tonk piano player, and then I put that joker to playing gospel music and formed a quartet. He let me go out in the front yard with a bulldozer, and I built a baptizing pool and run hot and cold water out there. Oh, honey, we turned it on. The last summer I was in that old Changang camp, we had a 2 weeks revival down there. Can you imagine that in a Changang camp? I still had that number on the seat of my britches. Old Flo could come out there and sit in those services, and I felt sort of like I was free. I felt different. I look at it this way. This God that I talk about don't have to be in a great big hurry about anything, because I did that for the next 5 years. And one morning somebody said, "Po boy, I just saw Flo go around the corner up there with your Sunday breeches, and it like scared me to death. I thought maybe some of my kinfolks had died, and maybe they'd got a court order and I was going to the funeral." But I come to find out that somewhere between 6 and 7 years there again, I'd been paroled again. And Flo had come to carry me home. We still couldn't hire a lawyer. We didn't have $1.50 between us. But we knew where our help had come from. We didn't know hardly how to talk to each other, but we knew where that help had come from. I went back to work at plumbing work for the next 3 years. I didn't drink liquor. Then I got involved with a big church and a gospel singing group, and we moved around all over the South. 3 more years and I didn't drink liquor. And then I taken a job as maintenance man in a big motel. And of course the liquor and the beer flowed very freely there, you know, with all the conventions. And I haven't got sense enough to know I'm an alcoholic. I thought, here's 6 years now on the streets and I haven't touched it. I can take it or leave it. And one day I decided I'd drink one of those good old cold Budweisers like these other boys are doing. My friends, when you read in this book right here that this is a progressive disease, that it always gets worse and never gets better, for God's sake, believe it. I drank one of those beers, and I wanted another one, and I wanted another one. I didn't get drunk that day or that night, but I kept right on till I did get drunk. And when I got drunk, that was worse than the last drunk or any other drunk I had ever been on. Yes, it gets worse. It is progressive. And I stayed drunk for a whole year. Yes, I'm very well acquainted with that feeling of hopelessness, helplessness, terror, despair, fear, confusion, bewilderment. I didn't know what to do. Nobody knew what to do with me. Somebody told Flo that put him in Peachtree Parkwood. Joe, that was back in the days when they used to give you 2 ounces of 180 proof stuff and a little fruit juice every 2 hours around the clock. I went in there drunk and come out drunk. So you better believe I'd be standing at that nurse's station waiting on my medicine every 2 hours. It wasn't long to what little money we'd saved up was all gone, and after a while the insurance was all gone. And then I'd have to go just wherever they would take me. My God, I made the rounds. And I continued to stay drunk. I think it was worse on Flo than it was on me, because part of the time I would drink myself into oblivion and I'd be out of it. Where she had to just sit and hold her hands and watch me die. The last alcoholic hospital I was in was over at GMHI on Briarcliff. And I'm sure it would have been the same old merry-go-round with the exception of one thing. On Monday night they had an AA meeting out there. And I'd been over there about 3 weeks then, and I still couldn't hold a cup of coffee. And they announced that they were having an AA meeting out there, and so again I went out there to see what these cats is putting down. And there's a very dear lady friend who happens to run a rehabilitation center there in Conyers now. She was in that group that came out there that night. She said I looked more like a dead man than anybody she'd ever seen. And after the meeting she came over and said, "Po boy, do you want to get sober and stay sober?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am, I sure God do, but I don't know how." She said, "I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but I'll be glad to tell you how I did it." Now that got my attention, honey. Here's somebody going to tell me how they did something. She gave me her telephone number and said, "Call her when I left the hospital." And I think I was about like a drowning man grabbing at a straw. I was sick and tired and scared. And I think that was the most important call I ever made in my life. I called Sue. she got the little meeting book out and found the closest meeting to where I lived in Stone Mountain. She said, they've got a meeting over there tonight. Now you get yourself over there. And I went scared plumb to death, very skeptical and very doubtful. I didn't think anything in this world was going to work for me. And you know, this old alcoholic mind of mine, I could just imagine all kind of questions they're going to ask you. Hey, boy, who sent you over here? You ever been convicted of a felony? They asked me this everywhere else I went. But you know what? Those people didn't care who I was, and they didn't care where I came from. They said, do you want to stop drinking? I said, yes, Lord. They said, you're in the right place. And you know, I sat around, there was a discussion meeting, and I sat around that meeting that night, and I heard those guys and gals say, my name's so-and-so, and I'm an alcoholic. And I thought, my God, this is the happiest bunch of folks I've ever seen in my life. And they say they are alcoholics. And if this is what an alcoholic is, I wanted to be an alcoholic more than anything in the world. Because to get from where I was to where they was a high step up. All I had to do was just look at the record. And when all my scorecard read absolute 0, I wanted what I saw. I asked a lot of questions. I'm sure I got a lot of good answers. One of the questions I asked, what do I have to do to be like you folks? And old Hamp D said, you might try sitting in that chair there listening. And as I started out the door that night, old Hal put his arm up on my shoulder and he said, now, po' boy, we love you and we want you to come back. We hope you'll come back. My God, I'd never had a man to tell me he loved me. They all wanted to kill me. And I thought, this joker's got to be drunk, and I am. I come to find out he'd been there about 11 years. He wanted to start the group. They said, don't drink and go to meeting. Thank God they didn't tell me any more than that then, because I didn't have sense enough to understand what they was talking about. I didn't have any trouble with step 1, 2, and 3. I made that decision. But to me, a decision ain't nothing but a decision unless you act on it. And of course, that 12 and 12 said we take affirmative action. And I did not take the necessary action. After a while, I got the wrinkles out of my belly, and I got to where I could sleep at night, and I could put my breeches on and go to work. And I got to where I could laugh. And I said, this is the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I like this. And I used to hear people talk about sponsorship. Now, this would really trip that hammer with me, because they'd call those guys their pigeons. Now, you don't live in the penitentiary 30 years and like that word pigeon. You think you're talking about stew pigeon. And of course, it was through ignorance. You know, I didn't know any better. And I used to say, well, I ain't going to be nobody's pigeon, and ain't nobody going to be my pigeon. And so I got on this little thing we talk about as a pink cloud for about a year and a half. And then I started getting restless, irritable, and discontented. And I almost got drunk, because I thought that was all there was to it. Don't drink and go to meetings. And I went so far as to pull up to the liquor store, and I remembered something I'd heard an old guy say right after coming into the program, and he talked about bowing over his steering wheel and praying. I was so confused, I was so mixed up. I gripped that steering wheel and I bowed over that wheel and I said, God help me. God help me, I can't help myself. And the help came. And the help came. And I began to take that affirmative action that we talk about. Faith without works is dead. And so I decided I would be somebody's pigeon. That scared me so bad. And I got me a sponsor, and I got me a good one. Thank God for that old boy. He lives down in Mississippi now. This old boy had a great sense of humor, but he was one of those men that walked just like he talked in this program, and I had a lot of respect for him. And I went to him and I asked him if he would be my sponsor. He said, "Po boy, I consider it an honor that you asked me to be your sponsor. But tell me something." He said, "I have seen you celebrate a birthday. Now, what's the big deal about getting a sponsor all of a sudden?" And I said, "Well, my program is not working too good right now." He said, "Oh, yes, it is." He said, "Your program is what got you to our program and the program. Your program has worked good. Now let's get rid of your program and get with the program." He was a very peculiar sort of a fella. He wouldn't agree with nothing I come up with. He said, "Po boy," said, "I read in the 12 and 12 where it says as an alcoholic, there's an awful lot wrong with us, and there's going to have to be a whole lot done if we're ever going to get into sobriety and be able to live like other people." And he said, I can see there's a whole lot wrong with you, boy." He said, "Have you ever thought about a 4-step inventory?" "Yeah, but it was yours I was working on." "Mine was all right." He said, "I'll tell you what I'll do." He said, "I'll be your sponsor if you're willing to do what I'm trying to do." And I said, "What are you trying to do?" He said, "I'm trying to follow the directions of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous the best I know how." I said, "I'm willing to try it if you'll help me. I don't know how." He's the one that got me into a 4-step inventory. And would you believe that I came up in with a lot of flaws in my personality? Sure did. All this old guilt, resentment, fear, anger that I had drank liquor at so long. You know, that book talks about how liquor was but a symptom. I never knowed that. And so then it was continuing on with cleaning up this old dirty house that I'd lived in for so many years. Step 4 through 9. And then 10 continued to take a personal inventory. My friends, this is a beautiful program. I found out from experience there's just a little bit more to it than just don't drink and go to meeting. But I very slowly and very gradually had to come to learn about these things. God has been good to me, and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous has been good to me. And there are many, many fringe benefits that come from trying to work this program the best I know how, is the way I have been taught. And that's follow those simple directions the best I know how. I received something about 5 years ago down in Georgia that don't many people ever get. I received a full unconditional pardon. And I'd been on the streets 13 years when I got that pardon. I've been on the streets now, I reckon 17 years, something like that. Today I don't even have a record, not even running a stop sign. First time I'd ever been free since I was a little boy. And all this came from working the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, trusting in this power that is so much greater than Po boy. This is a gratitude retreat. Honey, I have an attitude of gratitude this evening. You people in South Carolina and North Carolina, you sure have been good to me and old Flo. You've let us come up here a lot of times and share with you. And so, in winding my little talk up this evening, I would like to share this with you as I usually do, especially the newcomer. That the problem that lies ahead is never, 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 never greater than that power that's behind it. Thank God and thank you.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I don't not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.